Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you guys are excited for another month of books because I read 10 this month, a new record for me. I mean, I dropped one, but I read like 57% of it, so I've got plenty to talk about when it comes to it, so we're including it anyways. But yes, welcome, happy November. Well, December now, but I hope you had a good November. And here we are again. The first book I read this month is called American Gods by Neil Gaiman, and I read it because I watched Dead Boy Detectives and a couple of other things that Neil Gaiman has had influences on in the television world, and I like those plenty enough because they were a little weird, a little like quirky and fun, but still like intriguing and like ominous fantasy vibes. So I figured I'd pick up a book, and I will say I don't think I'll read another Neil Gaiman book because this one kind of drudged on for me for about 60% before I finally got into it. But this is about our main character who gets out of jail after serving for a crime that we don't learn a lot about in the beginning. And he just wants to go back to his wife, man. I just want to go be with my wife. I just want to go back to being a normal guy. My friend's got a job lined up for me. It's great. And he gets out of prison, well, he's about to, and the warden tells him, "Hey man, your wife died this morning. See you later." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, that's crazy." And it turns out, yeah, his whole life's kind of been upended. He had a whole plan when he got out, and it's not working out for him. And he just chills, kind of stoops in it all for a while. And he meets this strange man who's like, "Oh, you just got out of prison? Well, not a lot of people are going to want to hire you, but I will. I've got some stuff to get done, and I need a guy there with me, another guy on the job. You wanna come along? And it's good money." And so our main character kind of begrudgingly agrees. He thinks this guy's weird, but he goes along with it. As it goes on, this guy's talking weird shit like the gods and when we were in charge of the land and like all this kind of stuff. And eventually our main character's like, "Look, man, what's going on? Like, are you a god?" And perhaps there's a bit of drama going on in the godly world. And our main character has now gotten caught up in it. But maybe he always was. Who knows? What really happened with his wife and his job that he had lined up originally? Who knows? Could it all have been a big coincidence? But yeah, like I said, this kind of like drudged on for a bit. There were a couple of parts where I would just be like, why is this important? Why are we included in this? What's going on? And but other than that, once I hit the 60% and there was like a little bit more pickup in the action, I kind of liked it. But again, I don't think I'll read another Neil Gaiman book unless it's a little smaller. This one was pretty big of a first jump in, I think. But, it is what it is. Next up, I read The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. You guys know I love me my T. Kingfisher, and so I wanted to read a couple of her earlier books that were on Kindle Unlimited. And so I read The Twisted Ones. The Twisted Ones is about a girl who inherits a house because her grandmother dies. And her grandmother was not really like her favorite person. Like she kind of sucked ass and was just like mean to everybody. And so everyone kind of stopped visiting her because she just pushed everyone away. And so she gets this house and she goes there and she finds out that her grandmother was also a hoarder. And so not only did she inherit this house, she inherited all the shit inside of it and she has to get rid of it. So her and her dog, they're gonna spend like, a couple weeks maybe, depending on how much shit really is in here, cleaning it out and getting it ready to be sold because who doesn't need some extra cash? But as she's investigating, she finds some stuff about her step-grandfather and this weird journal that he kept and how there were some things that kind of kept him paranoid out in the woods. And some weird things start happening to her as well. And at first she brushes them off because, like, maybe I'm just paranoid. I'm in the middle of nowhere where I don't know anyone in the weird woods and I just am in this weird house and now I'm reading weird stuff. And so she brushes it off for as long as she can, but eventually she can't anymore. And yeah, I thought this was definitely a sign of her early works. The characters weren't as strong as normal, but God, I love the way T. Kingfisher writes dogs. It's such a weirdly specific thing, but every time that this woman puts a dog in a book, oh, it gets me. Oh, I even read this like on a weekend where I was dog sitting, and so the whole time I was just like, it's just like you for real to my dog. So I just love the way T. Kingfisher writes pets. She's just so good at it. Like Nettle and Bone had a great dog. This one had a great dog. Like, she's just so good at it. She knows what she's doing. And yeah, I thought the vibes were really cool. Some of the side characters were like a little like extra quirky for my liking, but you know, it is what it is. Sometimes you just have some quirky characters, especially in her earlier years where she probably was like, you know, figuring out where the line for quirky is. But I still love T. Kingfisher. It's always a good vibe. Next, I read Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany Jackson. I picked this one up because, again, I had Kindle Unlimited, and sometimes I just pick up random books, and I read this book in a day, I think. A couple of these early books I read in like one day, so yeah, I thought this one was interesting. It was about a young girl. It actually takes place in like the mind of like a 14-year-old and her best friend who goes missing. And she's really kind of frustrated because she notices really early that her friend is missing, but her friend is kind of from like a displacing family where people don't really notice when she's missing because she misses days here and there, you know, her family's kind of in a rough spot, you know, she's in a neighborhood where people kind of try to ignore what's going on. And so for a while, people don't even acknowledge that her friend's gone. And she gets really mad. And so she starts trying to investigate herself. And it turns out that she has some other motivations for finding her friend. Not just because it's her best friend, but because, you know, her best friend was helping her with some stuff. And now that her friend's not here, some shit might go wrong, is really the big thing here. And so, yeah, it's kind of like a detective book, but not really because it's a 14-year-old girl who's just getting, like, mad at everybody because nobody's doing anything, which I don't blame her. Like, queen, go out and find your friend if no one else is gonna do it. But yeah, it's definitely like a very, like, teenage angst kind of book of my best friend's gone and why does no one care except for me? So, definitely, an interesting read, you know? And I will say one of the things in this book involves a learning disability, and I have a friend who has the same one, and she did not think that the representation of the disability was very accurate. So I will say, don't read it with that in mind, but it was a good read, I think. Again, I read it in a day, so it couldn't have been horrible. I think the twist was a little like little odd, but not in a bad way. It just was like a little unexpected from my point of view, which isn't the worst thing, obviously. You want a twist to be unexpected, but I don't think it was the way I really would have thought the book would have gone. And it was kind of a weird twist. Again, it wasn't a horrible, like, game-changing one, but I didn't like it as much as I would have expected. But yes, that is Monday's Not Coming. Next up, I read The Blacktongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman, who I've heard a lot of good things about, so I figured I'd check out one of his books. I actually wanted to read The Daughter's War first, which is a prequel to this book, but you don't have to read them either way, you know? You don't have to read one before the other. So I figured I'd dive in. This book takes place in, obviously, a post-war place, since I just said a war book was the prequel. So this is a bit of an interesting thing. Basically, they go to war with goblins, and, like, all the men, they are horrible at war, and they just keep, like, throwing numbers at the goblins, and the goblins just keep, like, killing and eating and enslaving everybody. And so eventually they run out of ideas and they send all of the daughters to war, and they kick ass because they're badass bitches and women don't fuck around, and they also have cool magical birds. So this is after the war, so there's not as many men around. And one of the other big things in this world is the Thieves Guild. Ooh, Skyrim. We love Skyrim references. I'm just kidding. But yes, the Thieves Guild's very popular here, and our main character is from the Thieves Guild. But one of the big things about the Thieves Guild is to work for them, you have to go to the school for them, and you have to pay for the school for them. So a lot of the thieves who have no money end up in debt, which is where our main character is. And so he is going to go on this big job for the Thieves Guild to kind of like pay back his debt and avoid horrible consequences. On his way, he encounters a woman, an ex-soldier, by the way she carries herself and has really cool armor and a really badass bird that murders people. I mean, what? No, she doesn't. Who said that? But yes, she runs across him in kind of an awkward situation, but they both find out they're going to the same place, and they decide maybe we should work together. And begrudgingly, they tag along with each other and go on this little adventure, and eventually they pick up a little mage as well, and they're a fun little trio. It's very found family, very questy, very like travel based. Like they're going to a lot of different locations, which I really enjoy. I like seeing a world expand before me. And yeah, they go off to finish their quest together. But there's going to be some trust issues and some problems and some obstacles, and they're gonna have to figure it out and get through it together. But can they? But yeah, I liked it. It was a fun read. I feel like it was a little long, but it is what it is. That's probably just me. I was reading a lot of long books in that time, so yeah, I thought it was fun. I like a good thieving book. I think the main character was like witty, but not overly so. Like, usually I don't like kind of sex humor, but I think our main character did it in a a tasteful way almost. He had a lot of dirty, wry humor, and I liked it. I thought it was fun. I think I needed a little lighthearted kind of not really thieving book, you know? Lighthearted for me just means less murder than normal, so I thought it was fun. It was a good little intermission. Next up, I read Slewfoot by Brom, and this is a book that takes place in kind of the witch hunting era, and it's about a woman who she just gets kind of forced to marry a man off into America. Like, I'm pretty sure she's from England, and her dad is like, well, I'm gonna marry you off because I don't want to deal with you no more. So she gets married to a farmer, and they live on a farm, but then eventually, her farmer man, they go off into the woods to follow their lost goat, and her farmer man like mysteriously dies in this weird cave place. And it seems like after that, he's like awoken something with his death, and some weird stuff starts coming out of the forest, including this weird like demon guy. And he and the farmer lady establish kind of like a rapport and a deal where he's like, okay, I won't kill you and I'll help you grow some plants, okay? And she's like, okay, cool. I'll help you learn about humanity and, you know, your history and stuff. And he's like, okay, cool, cool. But at the same time, the lady's brother-in-law, he's trying to get the farm because it was his brother's, and he's like, well, I'm entitled to this property. So he's trying to sabotage her and accuse her of being a witch. And you can imagine that conversing with forest spirits doesn't look good for her. So that's kind of the big drama of the book. Is she a witch? Burn her at the stake. But yes, I think the best part of this book was like the last 40 pages, which I can't say too much about, but were a very satisfying read, because it was just so violent and raw and like deserved violence that you just really are like, fuck yeah, like, yeah, rip and tear, as they say. Yeah, it was a very gory read at the end, but like so satisfyingly so. Next, I wanted another quick read, so I picked up another T. Kingfisher book called The Hollow Places. And this one's kind of another almost inheritance-y kind of book because our main girl, she's going through a divorce, and so she's like, you know what? I'm gonna move back in with my family while I get things sorted and try to find like a stable job. And her uncle calls and he's like, hey, remember when you were a kid and you'd come to my peculiarities shop? I don't remember the exact phrase for it, but he's basically a hoarder of weird items like Bigfoot stuff and like alien things and stuff like that. And she's like, oh my god, yeah, I love that place. And he's like, well, I cleared out the spare room, like what if you come stay with me? And she's like, okay, yeah, this is like honestly the best offer I've gotten all day. And so she goes and she stays with her uncle, and she very quickly realizes like he needs some like health stuff, and he's just been kind of stubborn because he doesn't have anyone to help with his obscurities shop. And so she's like, look, I got things covered, like go get your knee surgery, go relax, like take a little vacation, like I'll handle things. And so he does, and he leaves her with the shop by herself, and she kind of makes friends with the neighbor who works at the coffee shop, Like he runs like the, bar. He's the barista and a bartender at night sometimes. And so they're always chatting. And one night she goes upstairs and she finds a weird hole in the wall, and it leads to a weird space. Like there's just like this space that shouldn't be there, like this hallway that shouldn't exist. And she's like, well, that's fucking weird. And she starts to explore it. And she brings her friend along at one point, and they're like, this is fucking weird. And they're like, are we hallucinating? Like, what's going on? And eventually they get deeper and things get a little weirder. And I don't want to say too much because it's kind of a book that you just fall into, the way that they fall into this weird space in the wall. And I liked it. I thought the weird space had some really fun aspects to it. It was very poetic too. Like it talks a lot about like the shadows in trees and like the way things move when you're not looking and like all those cool things. And her old books are always inspired by like other short stories. I think this one was inspired by The Willows. I don't remember who the author was, but it keeps getting suggested to me now, and I'm tempted to read it, but who knows? Who knows? So yeah, I thought this was really fun. A little horror story about trees and liminal spaces. We love that. Next up is the book that I dropped called The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wastelands, which I picked this book up because it was suggested to me by Kindle Unlimited because I like Piranesi, which I was like, Piranesi's like my favorite book of all time. I would love to read a book like Piranesi. And at first I thought it was going to be like that because this book's about this weird like space in Russia, between Russia and China, that gets like a weird corruption to it. And they build these big walls around it because they don't want this corruption to spread. And there's like weird creatures inside of it as well that are like mutated animals or even mutated people. And then this company decides, well, like, what if we put a train through that? And so they lay a railroad through the weird corrupted zone so that they can transport goods from China to Russia and vice versa, and also have like tourism and stuff. And so rich people are always paying to like ride on this train. And one of them wrote a traveler's guide about all of the weird stuff that he saw and what to expect on your trip. And honestly, that's what I was expecting to be reading. A cool book about a guy writing about his cool experiences. Instead, I got a book about train drama, about the passengers on the train having drama. And like, one of like the main girl, her whole like thing is that she thinks that her dad was like thrown under the bus for this like incident that happened to the train, so she's here to investigate. But like within 40% of the book, she's just trying to fall in love with somebody, and I'm like, girl, what are we doing right now? And another side character that we read from the point of view of often is just the most annoying man I have ever read in history. He is so boring and so stupid and so annoying and stuck up about everything. He is just unfun to read. So by like 57% when nothing cool is happening, which keep in mind should be happening because we're in a corrupted wasteland where like weird creatures and like weird corrupted humans live, but no, we're more interested in what fucking rich guy number 4 and old lady number 7 are doing. So I had to drop this book. I could not do it. I was like, you can't tell me it's like Piranesi and then give me this bullshit. But I don't know. It had potential. If I could read like the actual traveler's guide rather than the little like snippets that they give you in the book, I would be happy. But you don't get to do that. So I was very disappointed. Next up was my book club book, which was, I still haven't met with my book club, so I don't know if it's Kindling or Kindlings. I think it's Kindlings personally, but I gotta talk to my audiobook fellas first. Kindlings by Traci Chee, which I thought was a very good book, very juicy. It added to my books that have made me sob like a little bitch shelf. Yeah, this book is a kind of post-war story, just like the Blacktongue Thief, where there was a big war and normal means weren't very effective, but eventually they discovered these things called Valor gems, which you can infuse into like weapons and make them more powerful. But the Valor gems drain your life force. And so they were like, well, who has the most life force? Bingo, children. And so they took a bunch of like 5-year-olds and they trained them into soldiers and gave them these weapons, and like a bunch of them died horribly and like drained their life forces out of their bodies. But now that's over, and child soldiers are illegal, which means all the child soldiers like have no purpose in life because they were just created to be child soldiers. So this book's about them and a couple of them at that. And so we meet our first one named Liam, and she's like just kind of figuring life out, just kind of bouncing around, doing her thing, doing what makes her money when she needs it. And eventually she gets a job offer that she decides to take, but she's gonna need some help. She's gonna need some other kindlings. So she goes out recruiting. She meets Amity, and her and Amity, they don't get along great, but they both got a job to do, so they're gonna get it done, but they still need to recruit more people. And so this book's about them recruiting and then eventually going off to do this job, which is protecting a village from bandits who just keep showing up every couple of months and like demanding payment protection, basically. And yeah, this book fucked me up real good. Fucked me up real good. Very emotional. One of the other really interesting things about it is that it's written in the second person point of view, which means that it's like you did this, you are the character, like it's reading as if you are in the book. And at first it was a little weird, and then I settled into it and it was really nice, and it was kind of like being in like a little D&D adventure. So I really liked it, and you'll hear more about it at the book club meeting. I might edit it and upload it here, but if not, catch the book club stream. Last but not least, I read The Will of the Many by James Islington. Someone that I admire was talking about it a lot, and so I decided to read it, and I don't regret it. It gave very Red Rising vibes of, an orphan boy, kind of, in Red Rising, but not really. Going off into a place where he don't fit in, trying to fit in. But yeah, in the specifics, this book was about our main character, Viz. He comes from a country that got taken over by the main governance of this book called the Hierarchy, which demands, certain things from their people, aka like the literal will of your life, like your passion, your desires, all that stuff. Like you physically channel it in to contribute to the system and power things around the country, power people, like make them physically stronger, etc. And Viz doesn't like this system, not only because it took over his world, but because it's just fucked. But he's never been able to do anything about it because he is just kind of stuck. He's like a little war orphan in an orphanage. And eventually, his chance comes along. Some rich guy with a high up position adopts him and says, I'm gonna put you into this school. I need you to do some investigating for me, and you're gonna have to, be a spy, be really smart, advance through the system, learn to fit in. And at first our guy's like, well, look, I don't know about all that. But secretly he wants that vengeance too, so he kind of follows along. And I really like this personally better than Red Rising because I don't really like sci-fi that much. And this was more of like a Roman fantasy where there's like a lot of Latin vibes and stuff like that. There were some really cool like trials and challenges, and of course I love moments where our main character just like is a sassy bitch and like pulls off something crazy, which happens quite a few times because he is a misfit trying to get into this big crazy place, and sometimes you gotta do something a little crazy to fit in. So yeah, I thought it was fun. I liked it a lot. I think the ending was a very weird shift, but I'm looking forward to seeing what it happens with it in the like next book. Like I think it set up the next book really well, but I'm very confused, so I'm looking forward to it. But yes, that was The Will of the Many. And that's all my November books. I know it was quite a few, but I hope that you enjoyed. Maybe you found one that you want to read yourself. If you have any that you want to suggest to me, leave them down below. I always like some more book recommendations, even though I have a really long list to read. And yes, I hope you have a great December. I will see you in January. Farewell.